Good morning.
Good morning. Is this working?
It seems to be working. I see a live signal flashing in the corner there.
Okay, so we're I guess we shouldn't say anything too awful because
Not yet, anyway.
we're live in public.
We also seem to be somewhat coordinated in the stripy, horizontal, and vertical category.
Yeah, I should have put a tie on.
Yeah.
You're making me look bad. Are you going to
Well,
campus today?
it's not the first time.
No.
Yes, I will be going. I have a presentation to give about online teaching and ways that LaGuardia can increase its online offerings.
Excellent.
Oh.
Are they trying to do MOOCs?
We're not trying to do MOOCs. I don't think we're trying to do MOOCs anyway. If we are, I'm out of the loop on the MOOC loop. But we are very much aware that we're sort of behind the CUNY average of like percentage of courses that are offered in a hybrid or online format. And so we're, as an institution, trying to just actually think about ways to responsibly increase them. And so I've been teaching online for like almost 3 years now. So in the department that I'm heading up the sort of movement to try to do it in a way, because I mean online, I don't want this is not what we're here to talk about, but online teaching, of course, is important. It's not going to go away. I'm not 100% sure that you can get everything you get in a classroom, especially for philosophy, for instance.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to what extent and in which ways can you try to make that up. So I'm interested in experimenting and responsibly trying to recreate what goes on in the classroom to as much as possible online. And so right now I really like hybrid format classes.
Yeah.
And especially I'm sort of gravitating towards the 2-day-a-week in class, 1 hour a week online per week, instead of the other way of doing it where you could do 1 hour in class and 2 hours online.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyway. What about you guys? Do you guys offer online stuff?
A little bit. A few years ago, back when I was chair of the department crafted a letter saying that we absolutely would not do that. But,
yeah, I mean, I can see why. For the right kind of students, it's an opportunity to really go in depth and to work at, like, for instance, if you or I were doing it, we'd probably get a lot out of it because we're motivated self-starters. We like to read. We're thinking about this stuff anyway. And if we could go somewhere, and leave an interesting question, and then someone could respond to it in a time. I mean, it's a way of and you can get really in-depth discussions online. Of course, if you're not like that, and if you think you wait till last minute to do everything, it can be a disaster. So for the one big problem for me is, yeah, it works great for the right students. It's a disaster for the wrong students. How do you make sure the right ones are in there and the wrong ones are sort of aware of what they're getting into? Because right now they see like, oh, 3 units, 1 hour a week, I'm in.
right.
And then they get in the class and they're like, oh, it's more work than a traditional face-to-face class? Oh, no.
Yeah. One thing I'm a little paranoid about is that administrators are going to want to make a move toward recorded material.
Yeah.
And that you would just have some administrator running a class, and all the input from an actual professor would be just pre-recorded.
Right, exactly. So that's one of the problems with the San Jose State model, or whatever they were trying to do, right? They wanted to team up with the justice class that's really popular, the big MOOC, and they were going to have sections of it there or something like that. And yeah, that's the problem, is that it turns professors into glorified adjuncts or glorified TAs, and that's not good. I mean, people have their own approach to teaching, and it's fine the way if you use that material to supplement what you're doing in your own class, in your own teaching, but to just be like, oh, they're teaching and I'm just like doing assessment. I mean, unless the way the university is put together changes very differently. And some people say it should. Some people say separate assessment from content delivery.
Yeah.
Right now they're sort of yoked together, and I don't. It's an interesting up. We'll see what happens. Let the market decide.
Hey, have you ever seen the parody video called "For Profit University"? It's really good. It's very dark and very funny, and it's set like slightly in the future, and it's about this university where you can when you enroll in the university, it's all online, and you know, taking a class is very easy. You just you pay for the class, and this folder goes in this thing called your thought cloud, and and you don't actually have to like learn anything. You just like buy things called thought coins, and you put thought coins in the folder in your thought cloud.
Nice.
And eventually, you like you have knowledge stored in your thought cloud, and there's like a single professor that runs like these 1,000 classes, and students interact via these avatars, and they work at Arby's. They're all like these wage slaves that ultimately work for the university and Arby's. And as the video goes on, it gets like darker and more science fictional. They keep referring to this character who apparently was some kind of rebel hacker who subverted the system, and you're not allowed to talk about this guy, and it's like written into university policy that he's a non-entity, and it's pretty cool. It's like a good.
What's the name of it again?
I think it's called For Profit University.
For Profit. Huh. Yeah, that's good. I want to check it out. And that reminds me too. LaGuardia is one of the nice things about LaGuardia is our president, Gail Mello, little name drop there, is very much an activist in this, like trying to alert people to the dangers of the for-profit industry. And what's happening in that area is really disgusting. The more you learn about it, the more like revolting it is. The taking in of students, getting them loans, getting them degrees that don't really transfer or line up with real degrees, so they don't find jobs afterwards.
Yeah.
Defining default on a loan in a certain way, namely as making a certain like 12 months of payment, so that if you default after a year, you don't get counted in the default statistics that they put out, so they're like 99% success.
Yeah.
Just really misleading stuff like that. And so, I mean, as someone, even though I like online stuff and the stuff we're doing is really cool, I'm fairly conservative about education and about that it is in some sense involves an apprenticeship.
Right.
That it involves a mentor relationship, and that it's more than information transfer.
Yeah.
And figuring out how to make that like more traditional model work online is really the challenge, I think, for especially people like us who are in a more traditional humanities type field, even though particular people like us might be more closely aligned with the sciences. We still, as a discipline, are more thought of as a humanities discipline, you know.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, so bringing this back, yeah, there are people that say, we'll never teach that way. And, you know, to those people I say, read Quine and be an empiricist and try it first. And if it doesn't work, then you're right. But the video thing is important because I recorded a lot of my lectures, and I put them on YouTube basically for this exact reason, because I wanted them to make sure they were in the public domain and not owned by LaGuardia, and really not even owned by me, because they're there. I mean, you put them on YouTube, it has a public license, you know. So I want that content. That's general knowledge. That content. I mean, it's my specific way of delivering that general knowledge, but it's not proprietary information, and it shouldn't be thought of as owned by the university, because there was a worry that they could say, oh, here's your introduction to philosophy class, now take this adjunct, you're going to teach 4 sections of it and use these videos, and then you just grade the papers. I mean, that's a real sinister model, and I don't think anyone really has that on their mind, but, you know, we want to be alert to these.
Yeah, and also, you know, you and I both work at public institutions, and we're supposed to be, right, we're not in business.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? To be honest, the response, at least at LaGuardia, has been really positive. So a lot of my colleagues know that my stuff is on YouTube, and they say that's one of the cool things about it. They're like, this is great, you know. Really, we really do think of ourselves as like the world's community college. So it's like, yeah, we don't want it to be private and something that we guard, and that there's a barrier you have to overcome in order to be able to at least learn about this stuff. It should be available to those who want to know. Okay, soapbox away. Let's go.
Yeah. So why don't we first start and record some stuff that we could use as like introductory material. So do you want to say who you are, and then I'll say who I am?
Okay.
Edit this in later as like
Are we supposed to recreate our famous and historic introductions from our philosophy TV episode?
Just whatever you feel.
Oh, well, I like that way of introducing ourselves. That you started it, so I'll follow the tradition.
So who are you and what are you?
I am a carbon-based life form, currently residing in the local group on planet Earth, as it were, and more specifically, the North Continent of America in New York City. And I teach at LaGuardia Community College as part of the City University of New York philosophy, and I'm interested in philosophy of physics, philosophy of cognitive science, philosophy of mind, basically philosophy of anything. I'm interested in it.
You know, you left something important out.
My name is Richard Brown. What's in a name? Directly reference me, motherfucker. What's up?
I am Spartacus.
Exactly. I am become a mystery to myself. Oh, Saint Aquinas. Was that Aquinas or Augustine? One of the saints. Anyway, your turn.
Those guys whose names start with A.
Yeah.
Augustine and Aquinas. You know, I can't keep them apart.
And there's Anselm too. Don't forget the triple A.
Yeah, you know, I don't have a problem remembering who Anselm is, but Aquinas and Augustine, they're a single.
Yeah.
Single person.
Single thing. Well, Augustine of Hippo. I mean, you got to remember at least that he was of Hippo.
Of Hippo.
Yeah.
If he was an actual hippo, easier to remember.
Augustus of Hungry Hippo. Oh, excuse me, Augustine. Did I just say Augustus? Oh, okay. No. Can you just introduce yourself already?
So I'm Pete Mandik. I'm professor of philosophy at William Patterson University, and I'm interested in philosophy of mind and philosophy of science, especially philosophy of neuroscience. And the past few years, I've really gotten interested in philosophy of physics, especially things having to do with space and time. But mostly I'm a philosophy of mind guy who is obsessed with consciousness.
Yes. I mean, really, it all is. It's all consciousness.
What are you, an idealist?
What am I, an idealist? No, I'm a realist. I'm not a dreamer, man. Oh, wait, did you mean something else? It is interesting. You know, since you mentioned that, idealism, I don't know. Idealism is one of these perennial things that I'm sure, you know, we'll probably end up talking about at some point, but
yeah.
Are you an idealist? I don't know. So one question that bothers me a lot is, like, has science refuted idealism? And I don't think that it has. So if you, like, neuroscience certainly hasn't refuted idealism. In fact, some people might say one of the best arguments for idealism comes from neuroscience. Berkeley kind of thought of this himself. I mean, one of Berkeley's best arguments comes from his work on vision, namely how do we get a 3D scene out of a 2D input? So, you know, once you start realizing that the visual scene is constructed in some way by what's going on in the brain, then you start wondering, aha. Now, then you get at least the question of, is there a material world or whatnot? So you don't have to go for idealism, but that's at least leads you to this. It's not a silly question. And science hasn't, I don't know, has science refuted idealism? What do you think?
I think idealism has refuted itself. I don't know whether the refutation has been scientific or not. I mean, I do take idealism seriously in limited areas. So take, for example, color.
Yeah.
I think there's like it's still kind of an interesting open question about what colors are. Like when we say that something is red or blue, what's the best way of thinking of the truth conditions of that? And I think that you know, if you bring in you know, other pieces of the folk theory of color, like for example that red is more similar to orange than it is to green. Right? If that's part of like the folk theory of color, well, when you go looking into possible non-idealistic or purely objective grounds for those truth conditions, I really don't think you can find it.
Uh-huh.
You get, you know, things having to do just with wavelengths of light.
Right.
you've got to delve into the human visual system and things like opponent process theory, and now you
To
can
see
start to see
the
why,
families, right?
yeah, why there would be this property that that we label red, and why we perceive red to be more similar to orange than to green. So, for I think there's a really good case for color subjectivism, which is a kind of idealism about color, and that itself is wrapped up with scientific considerations. But like the global kind of idealism that you get from, say, like Berkeley, I just think that that's kind of like goofy. And my main problem with it is, those kinds of idealists, they're never solipsists. They never have the cojones to go all the way and be solipsists. And as best as I could, maybe they don't believe in cojones, but as best as I could tell, their main arguments for not being solipsists are arguments that I interpret as kind of these causal or explanatory arguments. They note that there's just certain patterns in their experience that they can't see how you could explain that without positing something outside of themselves.
Yeah.
And once you bring that kind of argument into the picture, once you allow that it's not a deduction. It's more an inference to an explanation. It's an abductive argument. It doesn't prove with absolute certainty that there's got to be something outside of you.
Right.
But once you admit that that's like an okay argument, that's a good argument, well, why not have there be what Berkeley called matter? Why not posit that there are things outside of the realm of ideas that are the cause of, at least in some cases, the cause of our ideas? So, if you're...
Yeah, why not? But why? Like, so if the only good reason to believe in the in something that's not idealism is why not, then all right, I don't know, that doesn't seem that great to me, especially once you throw kind of a Kantian take on all this stuff into the mix. So yeah, Kant, you just gave roughly one of Kant's more famous transcendental arguments for this kind of stuff, that there's got to be something stable that doesn't change, which by reference to the appearances which stream before us sort of are in motion relative to. There's got to be something stable that doesn't seem as though it's under our control. So the things that are passing, like the appearances that are passing before our mind, in order to make sense of how they're changed, it's kind of a really Newtonian point, right? In order to make sense of how that change is possible, it's got to be something that's not changing, something that's mind external. Of course, that sounds fantastic and wonderful, but then of course you find out that what Kant means by mind external is just idealism, but redefined so that the external simply means the part of the mind that you call the physical table. I mean, that's still idealism. I mean, transcendental idealism is idealism.
But what's idealistic about it?
That the table is a mental object, really, generated by the mind.
What's mental about it, though? Or mind generated about it?
Well, that it's a phenomena, that you experience it, and what experience is means applying certain transcendental categories, concepts like space and time, object, location, unity, plurality, cause, effect, the 12 categories or whatever that he rips off from Aristotle. So, but that stuff is, this is the precursor of the other argument that people give from neuroscience, because a lot of this stuff that Kant says, if you take out the kooky metaphysics, it's what neuroscience has discovered, that the mind is actively engaged in organizing and producing our experience, and rather than merely acting as a passive recipient of some external scene, but rather that the mind is constructing, that seeing an object involves a complex activity that the mind is engaged in, rather than a mere passive receptivity.
But I don't see why. But that would be idealistic.
Well, because how can the mind make something that isn't mental? What do you mean?
So I mean,
What it produces is the table. The table's in space and time. Space
well,
and
it
time
produces
are
representation,
right.
but the representation is accurate or inaccurate. Are the conditions of accuracy, are they themselves something mind dependent, or are they things that would be there anyway, independent of minds?
I mean, are we talking about Kant now, or like what I think? Because if we go on turn this into a Kant lesson, I'll say
I don't
one
like
thing.
Kant. Screw that guy.
I mean,
You're okay. I want to hear what you think.
but this is the argument. I mean, so I still haven't seen an anti-idealism argument anywhere. By the way, let me just ask you something. If this were a simulated environment, would idealism be true?
I think that there would be. No. There would be a ground to the simulation.
Well, but there's a ground to the idealism too, like in Berkeley's view. So the way I think, so one way, forget about Berkeley, you could transfer all of that into some kind of that the mind of God really is a massive hard drive, and that the idealistic mental world really is the simulated environment. So you got to get rid of the matrix, brain in a vat, and just think of pure simulation. Because that's more in line with what Berkeley had in mind, that there are just disembodied spirits and their experiences, and they're all being maintained in the mind of God. And so I think that, yeah, why is it that very much the same thing as this idea that you have a hard drive that's simulating a world, and there are a bunch of conscious creatures in that simulated world, and they're interacting with things that they think are physical, but and which, from their point of view, rightly should be called physical, maybe because they can touch them, they can feel them, just like Berkeley said. But really, is there something material there that they're interacting with? Now, you say there's a ground, right? A computational ground, maybe.
Yeah,
but that's not the thing that they're interacting with when they taste chocolate or grab the table. They're not interacting with that ground. They're having just a mental experience produced, yeah, by that ground. But how is that different? So there's two questions. One, why isn't that a good interpretation of idealism? And two, if it is, then how come you think it? You have good reason to think it's false.
I have good reason to think it's false because inference to the best explanation is in play, and I think I haven't supplied them yet, but I think there are better explanations that are non-idealistic. As far as the simulation stuff goes, when I think about simulations, I think of hardware and software, and I don't know if you can make sense of hardware.
Yeah, God is the hardware. And
God is pure spirit, right?
Sure, but if hardware just means you could. I say that you could answer that either with a yes or a no, and I'll say that either way you answer it. It seems I'm going to come out, or my view is going to come out all right. So let's say God doesn't have a body. All right. What does that mean? I don't know. It means he doesn't have a body. Or she doesn't have a body, sorry. So what does that mean? Well, I don't know. It means that there's some kind of non-bodily way of implementing certain kinds of computational states. Like, what does that mean? I don't know. Ask the non-bodied thing. I think it makes perfect conceptual sense to think of these kinds of states being implemented. And I mean, isn't that one of the things functionalists are always ranting about? Is, oh, this is great because you could have like an ectoplasm having these kinds of functional states being implemented. So what's the difference between that and this idea?
Well, look, it's incoherent.
So do you disagree with that functionalism when the functionalists say that you could have non-physical things that have functional states, and then that's one of the benefits of their view?
Hold on. I mean, let's leave physicalism off to the side for a second and talk about substance versus non-substantival ontologies. So for example, Descartes has, and the other rationalists, they're substantivalists. There's substances and then the states of those substances, right? So for Spinoza, there's just one substance.
Yeah.
And the way I hear Berkeley and these idealists, that they reject substance. There's just ideas.
No, Berkeley says there's two things: minds, spirits, and ideas.
So he's got
Ideas,
substances,
well, mental substances, yeah.
mental substances.
Spirits, what he calls spirits, and he thinks God is a spirit. Like I mean, that's the word that he uses. I mean,
And,
what else would you call a disembodied mind or disembodied substance? A spirit.
But are these substances something other than bundles of ideas?
It's not. I mean, what Berkeley says about this. I mean, I'm not that much of a Berkeley scholar, so I can't cite chapter and verse.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, you know, that's a good question. I'd have to think about that. So is he a Humean about spirits? I guess is the question that you're asking.
That's the question.
And I don't know, but I've always interpreted him more as a Cartesian about spirits. But you're right. I think I don't know enough about Berkeley to make that to say decisively yes or no, or even to make the argument one way or the other, honestly. But but what's wrong about Cartesianism about spirits?
I think
even if that's not Berkeley's view,
it's better.
Right. So what if that's his view, though, that there are these substances that are not physical? They have ideas. Ideas are not physical. They occur only inside these substances, and that these substances, in turn, are dependent on, ultimately and fully, in the thing which gives them their being, which is God, or the hardware of the simulation.
I think we have to be careful about what you mean by not physical. One thing you might mean by not physical is, in contrast with physical, one way to think about physical or material is something that exists outside of ideas or independent of ideas.
Yeah. Well, like I was thinking, like Berkeley thought. Mainly, something is physical if it can exist, even if no one happens to be, it's not being thought of at the moment or experienced by anything at the moment.
Yeah, something that exists, right? Something that exists unexperienced. So that's what's supposed to be material.
Right.
On that definition, as soon as you have substances, things other than the ideas themselves, you automatically have something material.
No, you don't. You have a virtual substance, which depends on this other thing.
I mean, look at the definition. The definition is supposed to be something that is independent of being experienced. So
right.
There anyway.
No, that's a physical substance. A mental substance is the kind of thing that's capable of having experience. So they're different kinds. So you're right. The word substance, we should get rid of it.
But does it
really
have
what
to be
they mean? Really, what they mean when they say substance, though, is thing capable of having properties. So physical things have physical properties, and mental things have mental properties.
But the thing that has the properties, does it have to be experienced? Can it be experienced?
It does. It's experienced by God. Or it has to be simulated. So it's not an independent substance. It's a mental substance. It's dependent on the ultimate mental or the ultimate thing, which in Berkeley, he might get into trouble about who's simulating God, and he would have, whatever.
No, I don't see how we would have any kind of hardware anymore then. If everything is experienced, there's nothing that is unexperienced.
God, it maybe is experiencing himself. I mean.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, I'm not saying I believe this, but what's wrong with the view? So
I don't think it's coherent.
I don't know how to refute. I mean, I've heard of the incredulous stare. I don't know about the exasperated sigh. I don't know how you're supposed to refute the exasperated sigh.
I don't think it makes sense for there to be a representational system where everything is represented, and there's no part of it that is not represented.
Why does? I mean, it's unusual, but what's?
I don't see, because I think there has to be
a kind of ultimate holism about representation.
But there's no ground. There's no unrepresented ground that explains the capacity for representation.
Yeah, it's turtles all the way down or turtles all the way around. I mean, I don't see why that's incoherent. I see why it's strange. I just don't see why it's supposed to be.
You don't think turtles all the way down is incoherent? I mean,
No, I think that there can be actual infinite series. I think probably that the distance between me and the
Oh,
computer screen is an actual infinite series
oh, boo.
because I because I
Terrible.
like because I like
Infinity is
calculus and
terrible.
I
It's the
believe
worst
that
thing.
calculus describes reality.
Calculus is a disaster.
No, why? Oh, come on.
Oh man.
Oh, we're gonna have a problem. Come here, come here,
So,
come here,
hey,
come
you want to talk about something else?
here.
Did you just strangle me?
Yes. You just now noticed?
Well, good thing idealism is true,
Okay, but hold
because I'm
on. So,
still alive.
but hold on. So you're so let's we're getting unraveled here. Let's take a step back and reassess. So let's suppose that, for the sake of argument, I take your point. Suppose there has to be a unrepresented ground for these representations. Okay. So say that God is that or the hard drive or God or whichever one you want is the unrepresented ground. But everything else which exists only because that thing represents it. So then suppose you're one of those things. Then you exist only because you're represented by this non-represented ground, this fundamental thing. So, okay, then is idealism true for you? Why isn't it true for you? Yeah, when you grab an apple, yes, there's some fundamental thing in the ground which is representing that apple and you grabbing it, but you're not grabbing an apple. I take it in that sense, in the same way you would be in your kind of material world scenario, or right? Or am I wrong about
Well,
that?
look, I'm happy to grant idealism about. Hey, are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay, your image froze,
Oh, sorry.
and
Can you
it
see?
froze in an unflattering.
Hello.
It froze in an incredulous stare, so maybe that's apt.
No, I just have myriad facial contortions that I require to expel these hot gases from certain cavities in my cranium.
So I think local idealisms are fine, and what you just described is a local idealism where idealism is true of a lot of things. But what I think is incoherent
But it's
is
true. But I was talking about idealism about experience, about like when you grab an apple and you bite into it and there's a crunch, and forget about the taste and all those other mental things, but like the mass and the density and all that other stuff. Uh, you're not interacting with something physical in this scenario I described.
in the scenario.
Right. So the idealism is true in that sense in this scenario.
What's the
There's no,
question?
there's, well, you were saying that this was an idealism in this kind. If
Not
simulations
global idealism, because
in a
it's not idealism.
simulation, there's not a kind of because I was trying to make the claim. I mean, if you want to rewind this, I was trying to make the claim that Berkeley it can be seen as making this kind of claim that if Berkeley were a secular digitalist like David Chalmers or something like that, instead of a religious member of the Catholic Church,
Yeah, no,
that
take God out.
he would say something like this, maybe that instead of God simulating everything and us never really being in contact with the physical objects, but rather in contact with mental things, and that the apple is mental in that sense, that in this digital assimilation, that is essentially true.
Yeah, but leave God out of it. God
Yeah.
doesn't. So and now,
But that's why I brought the hard drive in. The hard drive now replaces.
who's got the best explanation? If no one gets to appeal to God, why was God appealed to for Berkeley in the first place? He was trying to explain things like objectivity. He was trying to explain things like how science seems to work, why there seems to be natural laws, these regularities.
Right. And see, exactly. So that's part of another aspect of this, which is that all of that stuff can be replaced by this kind of simulation hypothesis, and all the arguments can be given
Why is that better
for
than the
that.
standard materialistic story? The standard materialist. So Berkeley posits God to account for, say, we've got dinosaurs and this geological record that seems to indicate that there was a bunch of stuff that existed prior to humans being able to experience it.
Yeah.
How could it be, even though it couldn't be in human perception?
Right.
Well, there's this non-human perception. But, you know, dude, why do we want everything to exist in perception in the first place?
Um, well, that's you see, you're doing the classic materialist bait and switch. So that's not the question. Here's the question: given that we only really know one thing with absolute certainty, and that is that there is experience, why believe that there's anything else?
Oh, I don't think we know anything with absolute certainty.
Well, anything that there's something that, well, really. So you don't think you know you're not a zombie with absolute certainty?
Right.
Wow. See, I know that with absolute certainty that I'm not a zombie. I'll go to the map for that. Absolute certainty, 99.9 bar. So, you know, there could be 0.0 infinite zeros, 1% chance, and I'll still say that's good enough for absolute certainty. I mean, there's no possible way for me to doubt that I have conscious experience. That's absolute certainty.
But you don't know what conscious experience is.
Of course I do. I have it. In a way that is just ridiculous to say. I mean, we can't play these kind of games because, you know, I'm gonna get angry and strangle you again, and I don't want to do that.
But don't you think the higher thought theory of consciousness might be true?
Yes, it could be true. Yeah, but what's that got to do with it?
But there's versions of it whereby you might turn out to be a zombie.
Those versions are absolutely false, and I know that already.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Any theory of consciousness which says that there is no consciousness should just be laughed at and dismissed. And I mean, you know, people who are into that kind of stuff can join the Flat Earther Society, Usenet, and go die in obsolescence because that's just completely absurd. And of course, zombies would say the same thing, but they lack something crucial, namely knowledge, which I have. And really, I hate knowledge. I've never even, you know.
That's right. Yeah, knowledge.
Yeah, knowledge is the quote, the shirt of Tony Chang. Knowledge is poo-poo.
Oh, right. That's right.
But look, if there's one thing that I know, it's that I'm consciously experiencing certain things right now, like allergies and the symptoms of watery eye, and the dry mouth that accompanies taking Zyrtec. There's sensations that are occurring because of that I could be wrong about their nature. I could be wrong about, you know, the way they're presented to me. I'm open to those kinds of internal skepticisms, which maybe we'll talk about later. Yeah. But the one thing that's not doubtable and which is not even on the table is, am I having experience at all? I mean, Descartes, as crazy and French as he was, doubted everything except Descartes never once said, "Oh, I'm sitting by the fire, but am I a zombie not experiencing anything?" I mean, that just, how do you even coherently entertain that idea?
Could you be wrong about whether your experience was as of red?
What just geared up over there?
I've got a gas-powered heater.
Okay.
Is it really hot?
Yeah, no, something just became self-aware.
That was my refutation machine. I was about to get the hell out of you.
Ah, I see.
I'm firing it up.
What
I'm setting you up for, I'm setting you up for, you know, realizing that your claim is so vacuous as to be equivalent to the claim that something is happening. And if you ask me,
that's not the claim. But even that would be a significant claim, because it's even if that is true, that's a significant claim.
That something is happening.
Something is happening from my point of view.
Well,
something is happening from my perspective. Something is happening for me. Something is happening or felt. So it's not just a happening. It's a point of view. It's, you know, it's not a view from nowhere. It's a view from right here, from inside, as it were, this dry mouth, watery-eyed perspective. So that's not a mere happening. That's a happening of a certain kind. It's a something, but it's a something for me.
But what I don't know what content there is to the claim that it's for you, as opposed to what?
Well, it means that it's not for you. That's one part of the content. So it's not. It's sort of located and shaped in a certain manner, given you know, that it's from this point of view and not that point of view. And given that I have different experiences, different associations, different concept maps, different ways of structuring or associating experiences. So part of what that means is that I have access to that in something which resembles not immediacy, but, you know, relative closeness.
But all this stuff
Like it's right there. But see how I had to get it to you? I'm still not fully getting it to you. It's coming in bits.
Stuff that you just rattled off in the past 20 seconds, you would say that your credence is like almost absolutely certain.
Say that again.
All the stuff that you just said about concept maps, etc. Like that's all you lumping that into your, you know, what you're absolutely certain of.
No, but that it's happening, okay. But that there's a point of view, and that there's you said what's the content at? So that's what I'm saying. Here's some kind of content. Do you think that's false? I mean, that seems...
Yeah, so take a very typical example, like a red sensation.
Yeah.
You know, I think that we could be wrong about even whether it's a red sensation as opposed to, like, an orange sensation.
Yeah, but you can't be wrong that it's a sensation.
But now, you know...
I mean, look, seriously. Suppose that you're having a thought. Then the thought is, you know, red is a sensation. Can you be aware? I mean, can you be aware of a sensation of red in that way as a thought about red? I mean, that just seems ridiculous. So you can. So suppose you're having an experience of red.
Yep.
You're saying you could be mistaken about it, and you think you're having an experience of red. You may actually be seeing orange or experiencing orange.
Yeah, right.
Can you be thinking about red and instead think that you're experiencing red? Or contrarily, can you be experiencing red and mistakenly think that you're merely thinking about red? Those kinds of mistakes just seem like ridiculous. I mean...
You don't think that they're mistakes you can make?
Empirically, I don't think we make those kinds of mistakes. I don't think there's any kind of... I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, that's why I said as an empirical matter of empirical fact, I haven't heard of a case whereby people systematically confuse their experiences for thoughts, or of a case whereby people systematically confuse a hearing for a color. Even if people associate sounds with colors, they don't think of the.
I think there's lots of examples of those kind of systematic mistakes about phenomenal knowledge. So take, for example, the McGurk effect. People who aren't familiar with that effect, if you ask them, like, you know, tell us about your experience, they would say, like, you know, I heard this guy say bat instead of pat, or right, and
but they didn't say that they don't ever say that they say I heard the person say this. They don't say I saw the words pat.
Yeah,
so they understand.
Or another example has to do with people's their visual periphery. A lot of people think that they are sensitive to colors in their visual periphery.
Right.
They're not. They don't. So
they're sensitive to black and white and variations in illumination and other things which we would naively. Now you're right. They don't. It's not as detailed, and there's maybe some filling in, but that's not the kind of thing I'm talking about.
But why wouldn't that be an example of mistaking? So they're thinking about colors in their periphery, and they think they're experiencing colors in their periphery, but they're not experiencing colors in their periphery. They merely think they do.
Because they're experiencing visual input in their periphery, from their periphery. It's just degraded, and the amount of content and richness and detail that they attribute to the visual content, which they are correct that they're perceiving, is mistaken. But they're not saying I'm hearing sounds at the periphery in my peripheral vision. They don't mistake the visual input for auditory input
But
and say that's a sound.
Thoughts for sensations. They think they're having.
No. That's a theoretical interpretation of what's going on here.
What else is there to do? But
well, there's being fair and looking and then considering the other interpretation, which is that they really don't experience those things, but they merely make a misinformed judgment about about how much detail there is in the periphery. Maybe because.
No, that's what I'm saying. They make a misinformed judgment.
Yeah.
But the judgment is about what they're experiencing.
Right, and the judgment is not that. Oh, I'm thinking that I see color right now. The judgment is I'm seeing color.
Right.
They're wrong. So they don't make the mistake that is of the kind that matters to me, namely where they mistake a thought for sensation or vice versa.
But they think they're having a kind of an experience of color, but they're not having an experience of color.
That's right, but they're having a visual experience, and they think they're having a visual experience, and they are having a visual experience. So they're just wrong about the detail of the visual experience. They're not wrong about like which thing they're picking out.
So let's go back to my earlier question. Couldn't you be wrong about whether you're having an experience as of red?
Yes. Maybe, but not in the sense where you think that it's the sound of a trumpet, or you think that it's that you think red is the sound of a trumpet. What's another good one? Aha, the smell of cinnamon. So you even in synesthesia and those other kinds of cases where you associate maybe a smell with a color or vice versa, it's not as though, or at least I don't have that. So but I'm assuming, and from what I've read, and to the limited extent that I've talked to some of these people who maybe some of them and I've talked to as well, so you can say something about this. They don't say, I'm confused about whether that's a smell or a color. They say, somehow that smell seems to go with that color. So, but they're not confused about whether it's a smell. They know it's a smell, and they know that they're experiencing it in a smelly kind of way, as opposed to like in a visual kind of way, even if they're like joined. And that's the same with the McGurk effect. So I don't think those. So I agree. I'm open to internal world skepticisms to some extent, misrepresentation of one's own inner life. I think that you have to be open to that. But at the same time, even so, there are some things which, we're just not open to. And I don't think there's any evidence for either, or reason to be open to. So for those kinds, like that you're having an experience at all. Those are the kinds of things I'm talking about. That
you're having an experience at all.
Right. That it's a visual experience as opposed to an auditory one. That seems relatively...
I'm not going to grant that as visual versus auditory. Again, talk about absolute certainty. I'm not going to grant that you're absolutely certain about that.
So you're telling me that you're going to be walking down the street and someone's going to call your name and you're going to say, gee, I wonder if I'm hearing my name being called or if I'm having the visual experience of seeing my name written down. That's a legitimate possibility to you that you could. No, it turns out that really you were visually experiencing the name written on your office door, and you thought you were hearing.
Yeah, sure. I bet we could cook up an experiment where something like that happens, where people have to keep track of an auditory list, something presented into their ears, and also a visual list, and it would be kind of like a Stroop thing,
right?
Where
the Stroop thing doesn't get to the point, though, because in the Stroop case, what you're showing is that there's interference between two different ways. Two different systems, the cognitive system or the conceptual system and the color representing system.
But like suppose we have, we're showing people names. Like they're looking at visual words.
Right.
They're reading, they're seeing Richard Brown spelled out, Pete Mandik spelled out.
Right.
And they're also hearing people saying names. And sometimes what they hear and what they see on the screen are the same thing. And sometimes, they're looking at the written Pete Mandik, but they're hearing someone say Richard Brown.
Right.
And there might be some kind of probe, like they have to say whether they agree or not, like what they're seeing is what they're hearing. I don't know exactly how to construct the experiment, but I bet we can construct an experiment where people are confused about whether they saw the name or versus heard the name.
I'll take that bet.
Really?
Yes. Absolutely. So, and you would have to. It would have to be not only the case that you showed that there was confusion about whether they saw it or heard it on any particular, like, because you don't want it to be a memory thing. So the trick is not it's not always a memory thing, since what I'm claiming is that while you're having the experience, it's apparent to you which modality the experience is coming from. But you know what? I'm thinking about an interesting way of arguing against myself, which has occurred to me, which is, I wonder if like thought insertions or some schizophrenic experiences might matter here. So sometimes people will say that one possible explanation for schizophrenics hearing voices is that they have an internal monologue that they mistakenly think is coming from outside, or vice versa. They hear, chatter from outside, like background noise, that they mistakenly think is an internal thought. Am I describing that right? Am I misremembering this?
No, that sounds right.
If that were the case, then it does seem like you might have cases where someone couldn't tell if they were hearing it or thinking it.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's an interesting kind of case, as a matter of fact. But still, they're not confused. Oh, well, maybe are they confused that they're having the experience? If they think, well, this thought isn't mine, are they confused about whose experience, who's having the thought? I don't know. Yeah, I might be wrong about this. I might back off a little bit of this idea.
So just not to give an argument, but just summarize what my view is. My view is that what we're absolutely certain of are these super vacuous claims like that I'm having an experience.
Right. Yeah. Right. But that's not super vacuous, because when the zombie says it's false.
It's more vacuous than I'm having a red experience or I'm having an experience versus a thought.
Right.
It's
so
just a super vacuous thing, and it's so vacuous that I'm not even sure that it has any content at all, as opposed to like that there's something rather than nothing.
I like don't
something
know.
exists.
So how about this?
Doubt that something exists.
How about if I say, all right, yeah, that's interesting, but in the normal case, the brain, when it functions correctly, reliably produces this kind of knowledge, and it's only in these other kinds of cases, like weird cases, experimental cases, schizophrenic cases, where this reliable process breaks down and where you find these kinds of holes manifesting themselves. But in the normal day-to-day case, for the most part, we have a reliable mechanism process that produces very nice general knowledge about whether you're seeing
Richard,
something.
Are you absolutely certain that you're normal right now?
No.
Isn't it possible that you just became schizophrenic?
It could be possible, yeah. This conversation's helping convince me. Yeah, I mean, look, this is something I think that is going to become maybe an ultimate issue, which is the following thing. How do we react to these like radically skeptical scenarios? By the way, I'm not sure if the idealism thing is a skeptical scenario or not, so let's not talk about that right now, because I would probably end up more on the David Chalmers side of the story, whereby if idealism turned out to be true, it wouldn't be a skeptical scenario. We just learn about the metaphysics of our world. So I don't know. We could have a debate about that later, maybe. But I tend towards that view. So I'm not interested in having a debate about whether skepticism is true or not. Now I forgot what I was saying, as a matter of fact. What was I just talking about?
I don't know. You brought Chalmers into it.
Yeah, I know. That's what distracted me. I started thinking about something else.
Then we just lost everything.
We just lost everything. Oh, well.
David Chalmers?
Well, I guess that's... Yeah, I don't even know. I have to watch the video to remember what I was just saying.
So I think...
oh, right. So about the idealism and leaving that off to the side. Now I forgot it again. No, never mind. Let's just move on. Because aren't we approaching like an hour? Shouldn't we end this at some point?
Yeah, we should wrap it up soon. But to try to recall where we left off, I was trying to give you a hard time about whether you were absolutely certain that you had.
Right. See, speaking of memory lapse, see, though, that's a good way of illustrating my point. So there's a question about how you deal with these radical skeptical scenarios. And I was making the point that I don't think of the idealism simulation stuff as really a radical skeptical scenario. A skeptical scenario, I would say, is one where most of your beliefs turn out to be false. And so some of the most radical ones are the kind that you just mentioned. Like, how do you know that you didn't just become schizophrenic? Like, bam, right now. How do you know that? Or even more radically, how do you know that the world wasn't created 15 seconds ago, complete with all your memories and everything else, blah, blah, blah. So these are like radical skeptical scenarios whereby your memory that you had an experience 10 minutes ago is false, which is a kind of different scenario than the idealism scenarios. So now, how do you respond to those? I don't know. Some people say, gee, those are interesting conceptual possibilities, but why should we think they're real, things to worry about given, our normal assumptions about the way the world works in science, and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, you can't rule them out a priori. I certainly have never met a way of ruling them out a priori. And so, but does that show us that we don't know ordinary things about the world? Like that we have these experiences and so forth. So this is what I was going to say, is that this is the ultimate thing. Is like, yes, given that there are these kinds of radical skeptical scenarios, like the instant schizophrenia, like the world created a second ago, which way do you go? Do you go by saying, okay, well then all knowledge is, we just don't know anything, we give up, or do you say, well, no, that doesn't refute knowledge claims that we ordinarily make? And again, since we brought up Chalmers, I'll use them to good purpose here. You might say, well, look, you do the kind of dancing qualia, fading qualia style argument to get around this stuff, but not about consciousness. So you do something like this. Look, that scenario is just so weird. So many things we hold true would just be so false that it's just so implausible that probably, more than likely, it's not like that. And then we go on with our lives. And isn't that a better response? An abductive argument like yours.
But I think things are different when we're evaluating claims of certainty versus claims of knowledge. So you want to talk about knowledge? Yeah, sure, I know I'm not a zombie. But you want to talk about certainty? Well, I'm not certain about anything.
Well, I said no with certainty. So I was joining the two. What I said was that I know with certainty,
certainty
that I'm not a zombie.
Knowledge, right? Certainty is is a kind of knowledge, and then there's like the other kind of knowledge, which is not certain.
In the old days, they used to call it conclusive reasons or conclusive knowledge or something like that. There's a kind of knowledge that just like, namely this kind. I'm having experience. I'm not a zombie. That's conclusive.
So that's like the super hardcore knowledge.
Yes, and it's not vacuous. It's what I'm fighting against, or what I'm trying to like put the defense against, is that that's a vacuous claim. It's not vacuous. It's extremely meaningful because the truth of that one simple claim makes this not a zombie world, and that's amazing. That's something that is the most fantastic thing that's ever happened. After having just watched the first 2 episodes of Cosmos, which I thought we were going to talk about today, this is the most amazing thing that's ever happened in the history of the universe, is consciousness. And the fact that we know that this isn't a zombie world is like, okay, that's important.
Here's the thing. I just want to make a quick point about knowledge versus certainty.
Yeah.
And so radical skeptical hypotheses, they don't undermine vanilla knowledge claims, right? We could say, like, look, that's absurd. We don't have to take that into account. I still know that I'm alive, and that I'm married, and that I have a dog. But I think they do undermine claims of certainty.
And you would say that in the Matrix or in the simulation too, that you have a wife and a dog and a mind.
Oh, I thought we were putting aside the Chalmers kind of thing, but...
No, I just want to know if knowledge resists that kind of transition or not. Is it invariant under simulation?
What I'm calling vanilla knowledge. Maybe. I haven't thought super hard about Chalmers' Matrix arguments, but if I just had to go one way, I'd go along with Chalmers on that.
Okay.
But But I do think that, you know, if you're saying, if you allow that these radical claims like that the universe just popped into existence 5 minutes ago, if there's some non-zero probability that that's true, then you can't be 100% certain that it's not. So so these radical claims do undermine your claim to certainty, right? So I'm happy to grant that you have phenomenal knowledge. I'm just questioning whether you have phenomenal certainty. And I do think that
and I said at least you have phenomenal certainty with respect to the fact that there is phenomenal. There's something phenomenal. So that's the extent.
And then I say that's vacuous. And okay.
See, and I say that's an important discovery of the entire universe. We've covered all the bases, exactly. So, by the way, so we have to mention the two most important things that have happened this week before I have to go and prepare for my presentation on online teaching. And that's the announcement of the 5 sigma level of evidence of inflation. Which
I've
they
read
announced.
The headlines, but I haven't read the actual articles.
I've read the headlines, I've read the articles, I've watched a video by Sean Carroll giving his sort of basic explanation of it. And from what I can tell, it seems significant. And it seems like, even though obviously you should be cautious when they announce big results like this, because next week they could be like, oh, there was a hair in the whatever on the lens.
But confirmation of what was already like kind of the orthodox view, or what?
Well, it's no, it's confirmation of inflation, which is, I mean, I don't know how much detail we want to go into this, but here's one big mystery, or a kind of mystery which physicists worry about, which is the following thing: the universe is relatively flat. So while space is in fact curved, and while in fact Euclidean geometry doesn't, as far as we know, describe ultimate space-time, because it's a non-Euclidean geometry, the extent to which it actually is curved is very minimal. It's hyper minimal. It's very small. As a matter of fact, it conflicts with sort of what you would predict the curvature of space would be if the Big Bang theory were true, namely that if everything was, everything just was the way it was, and then boom, you would expect more. So one way, this is the idea of inflation. So the idea of inflation is basically, okay, so before the Big Bang proper speaking, there was inflation, which is the rapid expansion of space-time or something like that. Space-time itself, and sort of that rapid expansion infuses the space-time with a kind of energy, which then results in the Big Bang, the normal association of the Big Bang, which is all the matter and stuff being blah, blah, blah. So inflation is nice because theoretically it explains why space is kind of flat. Because if you imagine it rapidly going like that, then you smooth out a lot of the irregularities. And so so physicists have really liked this. And Brian Greene does a whole thing on this, and inflation has been very controversial because there hasn't been any evidence for it. It solves some things mathematically and theoretically, but we haven't had a lot of confirmation for it. And also, it seems to require sort of the travel faster than light. So anyway, so it's weird. But one of the things that is predicted is that should be able to see some after effects of this, that some what they call cosmic ripples in the background, microwave cosmic radiation. So it predicts that you'll find a certain kind of rippling in detectable radiation, and then they seem to have found that. So it's like a direct prediction of inflationary cosmology, which seems to be confirmed to the highest level of scientific evidence, which is the 5 sigma level, which means I think it means that the p-value is so small that it's ridiculous. Like it occurring by chance is something like 1 in 30 billion or something like that. It's like ridiculous. So that's like the highest level of allegedly the highest level of confirmation that you get in physics. And so they say they have it. And if that's true, I mean, if that's true, it's amazing because
idealism is false.
Because idealism is false. No, in fact, you know what? Here's this bring us full circle, Because one nice thing about inflation is how do you make sense of like space-time just coming into existence and rapidly expanding? Here's one way you do it. You turn on the simulation. That's one way that you get that, is you have the simulated space come online. And so I happen to think that inflationary cosmology fits perfectly, if not conceptually well, with these kinds of discoveries and these kinds of simulation arguments. And in fact, I'll just end on this. I think that the traditional fine-tuning arguments give more evidence for simulation. Because
you're happy with turtles all the way down.
I'm happy with a lot of things. What I'm happy with is, if you can show me there's a contradiction in the thing, then I'll say I'm not happy with it. But if it's not contradictory, then I say, why isn't it possible?
Who simulates the simulators?
Well, that's a separate question, but it's possible that it's simulation all the way down.
No, it's not.
Yeah, well, I see why it isn't. I mean, where's the? Are you Aristotle now? I didn't know.
I might be.
There's a first cause.
I don't have insert knowledge of who I am.
I mean, I don't know. I don't never found anything problematic in the idea of an infinite series being physically instantiated. It just means that physical reality is a bit stranger than you thought. Like you could subtract half of something and still have the same amount. Okay, so that seems weird, but whatever.
Infinity might be a fun topic for us sometime.
Yeah.
Because I talk about it a lot in my space-time class.
Cool. Yeah, and I talk about it a lot with the mathematician in the office across the hall with me. So
say that again?
I said I talk about it a lot with the mathematician who's in the office across the hall from me.
Okay, cool.
So, and then I try to do some Cantor diagonal proof and stuff. Because to be honest with you, like pre-Socratic philosophy to me is just straight philosophy of mathematics.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can't really understand it unless you do some philosophy of geometry, philosophy of infinity, which really obsessed the Greeks,
Yeah.
And what's really exciting to me is like the proof of irrational numbers and some of these, and the proof of the Pythagorean theorem. And the way the Greeks did it was so much more elegant, so much more better than the algebraic way we do it.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, brings us to something else I thought we might talk about, which is the view of a certain NYU professor on space-time that we were corresponding about. Tim Maudlin, and one of his views is that sort of the algebraication, the smuggling in of algebra and calculus,
yeah,
and the supplanting of geometry as the fundamental tool for physics has distorted in a not useful way the way we think about space-time. And
yeah.
And I don't know how I feel about that, but I think it's an interesting idea. I think it's a very and it's interesting that the Greeks the geometry was the fundamental science of a way of approaching knowledge about the physical structure of reality, and that switched, and now it's algebra and calculus, and that's got to have some kind of theoretical consequence, whether it's good or bad.
Yeah, I do think that's an interesting thing that he says, and I'm inclined to agree. I do like his emphasis on geometry. I do think he does some fishy things with it, though. I don't like his solution to Newton's bucket.
Yeah, the Newton's bucket thing, I know. It's I was in the seminar where he was talking about that and talking about his solution to it. So we should definitely have this discussion.
Yeah, we should do that. But you said there are two things that happened this week, and one of them was the confirmation of inflation. What's the other one?
Cosmos, baby.
I hate it.
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
I tried to watch the first episode. I'm just so disappointed.
Oh, I liked it. I give it a thumbs. I give it a this.
I like Neil. I think I like Carl Sagan even more, but I think Neil deGrasse Tyson is really great. He did a really great thing for Nova about Pluto. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. But this the new Cosmos thing. First off, I haven't been able to watch it without commercials. I don't know if there's a way of watching it without.
No, they have it on the Fox website, and it's only available for free for like 46 days or something like that.
It's a real drag to watch it with commercials inserted. And
I just check my email during those commercials.
It's also I don't like having my attention interrupted.
All right, someone will rip it off and put it on YouTube soon.
And I just feel like there's something kind of shallow where Carl Sagan, he comes across like deep and spiritual and philosophical, and I feel like in comparison, even though I do like Neil deGrasse Tyson, but in comparison, he is relatively flip
I don't know how I feel about that, but let me just ask you a comparison question. If you put this cosmos, at least just the first episode, if you put that up against Brian Greene's Elegant Universe Nova special, what do you think of the comparison about those two? Have you seen the Brian Greene one, first of all?
I've seen some episodes, yeah.
Because I use that in my class a lot when we talk about quantum mechanics and stuff, and multiverse and stuff. So I mean, so that used to be the thing I would always go to, but now I'm wondering, is this cosmos better? So I don't know. Do you think that's better? Which one do you think is better?
Well, I've seen more of the Brian Greene than the Cosmos thing, so maybe this.
That's why I said just the first episode. Like,
yeah, right.
Given what you've seen.
The Brian Greene, I'm impressed by how much it explains. There's a segment of the Brian Greene thing where he talks about just the basics of space-time theory and why moving reference frames would result in different judgments about when occurrences happen. So,
right.
And there's this great graphic where he's got the space-time loaf.
The loaf, yeah. I use that loaf clip, yeah.
Slices into the space-time loaf, and there's a little alien on a tricycle, and it's accelerating away from this. It doesn't need to be accelerating. It's just moving at a constant velocity away from some guy on a park bench on Earth. And he's talking about how the stationary guy on Earth and this moving alien would have very different simultaneity slices. Yeah. So what counts as happening now relative to the alien would be like 200 years in the past.
Right.
Just because, in part because of the very small angle between their simultaneity slices results when you go all the way to Earth. It results in this huge difference in location, in time, and that's just so cool. It's a really great thing to show to students. I do show it in my class. It's a really really great explanation. You don't have to get into equations. You can just see the geometry of it. Right, and so I feel like the green stuff is great for explaining things. Really, I feel getting into the concepts.
And you don't think that the Cosmos thing explains anything like that?
So far, I feel like it's mostly just woo,
flashy
woo, show. Science.
But here's one thing I think that there's two things I guess there's three things. No, wait. There's infinite things I'd like to say, but I'll limit it to three.
There are no actual infinities, Richard.
There's a conceptual infinity of things I'd like to say, but I'll limit it to an actual three. So first, I think that what's good about it is that stupid gimmick of the cosmic year, even though it's a gimmick and it's stupid, it's not quite a gimmick in the full sense of the word gimmick, namely something flashy that doesn't add anything to the substance, because I do think it helps conceptualize the distance and time here, which people just can't do in any kind of realistic way at all. I mean, 13.8 billion years, give me a break. It sounds like, all right, so it's roughly like 12 months, like a year.
Yeah.
So I thought that conceptual idea was, okay, that's kind of interesting. And then what comes out of that is...
By the way, though, that was he was just replicating something that Sagan did in the original Cosmos, the cosmic calendar thing.
Exactly. So, but they did it in a better... I mean, exactly. So that's from the original, but the effects were better.
True.
I don't know. So that was something good. I mean, you're right. They kept the structure of the original pretty tightly. And that's one of the great things about it. It should have been kept, I think. And the second one, which I just watched this morning, which is all about evolution, really just kind of follows Darwin. I mean, it's basically like the animated version of Origin of Species, which is good. That basically makes the important point, which I think is a good important point to make, that Darwin's case for evolution, given all the evidence now that we have, is still the best case for evolution that there is. Namely, and this is what's good about the series, is they make the distinction between evolution as the explanation of species variation and evolution as the answer to origins of life. And he's very clear. We don't know what the origins of life are. And then he says we could come from somewhere else in the Milky Way. Okay, so I like panspermia, but that's a different thing.
You also like turtles all the way down. So
I like anything that's not contradictory. I'm a purveyor of the non-contradictory. I
like explanations.
And some explanations are non-contradictory, so I like them as well. But look, so that's one thing that I thought was really nice, that they kept that year structure, They really brought out the fact that human beings are a late addition to reality, occurring sort of like in the last hour of the last day of the full cycle. So that was good. That was good. People need help in this area, because I can report to you that, like, when I go into classes, and in my intro to philosophy class, I say, okay, when did people start farming? And they say, like 5,000 years ago. No. When did human beings evolve? Oh, I don't know. Maybe 10,000 years ago. Wrong.
Yeah.
There's like a real skewed sense of when these events occurred. So we need stuff like this, which is flashy, which is kind of, you're right. It doesn't give you a deep explanation, but it gives you some way to conceptualize the amount of time that's happened.
Yeah.
So I like that. One thing I really didn't like about it was the Adorno stuff, the Giordano Adorno.
Bruno.
Whatever his name. Yeah, Bruno. Sorry, Giordano. Whoever the real Giordano that I was just thinking of is. But anyway, the Bruno stuff. And here's why. Not because, there's two reasons that I didn't like that. Here's one. If you want to find a crazy dude from antiquity who believed in infinite worlds, then hello, Democritus is your guy. Democritus thought that there were infinite worlds, that time was infinite, that every possible world which could be built was built, that every possible kind of life which could exist did exist at some point. I mean, he had a real far out view about reality. But the interesting thing about him is that he didn't base it on this weird neo-spiritual revelation.
No, he actually had arguments for it.
He actually had an argument, and it was based on the principle of sufficient reason, namely that, according to him, there was no good reason for these things not to be combined in that way given enough time, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And that's an actual argument, which you could, instead of like a random lucky, I mean, yeah. I didn't like the idea that look how this guy had this great vision, and that spurred debate and people to
Tyson is anti-philosophical. He's made remarks that I think are a little crappy.
Really? Oh, I don't know about that.
Yeah, he had this thing recently about, a few months ago, about how philosophers are just tourists. Like scientists are explorers and philosophers are tourists or something, and
I didn't know he said. I heard someone that someone had said something like that.
Yeah.
That they were tourists ripping off the ideas of other people, or thinking they could do their subject as good as them, or something like that.
Yeah.
That wasn't him.
Yeah. He had. Well, I mean, maybe a lot of people said it, but he said it in one of his tweets.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I think there's a lot of physicists that are kind of anti-philosophical. For example, Richard Feynman, who, by the way, is a really good philosopher.
Yeah, good philosopher of science, exactly.
In some cases, it's because they've been exposed to what I would regard as bad philosophy. So, Feynman, his I think main exposure to philosophy was like Feyerabend.
Right. The positivists, yeah, exactly.
Well,
I hate them too. Everyone hates them.
Feyerabend was not a positivist. He was more like anti-science in a way. Like, science is just radical, constructive, socialized baloney.
Oh, okay.
Scientists don't want to hear about that.
But that's a kind of positivism, isn't it?
I guess so.
It's a verificationalism, at least, or something.
It's more like anything goes. Continental. It's in spirit. It's more like
continental positivism. The world is a text, and only your experience can verify it.
Right. Yeah. I don't know.
Okay, so yeah, no one likes that. That's crappy.
So I think I'm inclined to think that some of these scientists are anti-philosophical because they've been exposed to the wrong philosophers.
Well, see, that's the thing, though, is that people don't realize that what they call science really just is empiricism. That it's the commitment to the view that the scientific method is the best way to answer certain kinds of questions, which is the philosophical view known as empiricism. So that even if you say I'm anti-philosopher, I've often taken that to mean I'm anti-a priori philosophy. I'm anti-armchair philosophy. I'm anti you doing philosophy of science without being a scientist or knowing about science,
right.
which is not not to say they're anti-philosophy. That just shows that they're ignorant of what philosophy really is, because what they're saying is, I'm anti this approach to doing philosophy, and really I think, you know, empiricism is a better approach, or as opposed to constructivism or something.
But anyways, I think it would have been great if Democritus got onto Cosmos instead of Bruno.
Exactly, for that exact reason. I mean, he wasn't killed for his beliefs, but you know, he got a little short shrift.
And you know, prior to Bruno showing up, there was a little bit on Lucretius. Lucretius has, I think, an actually pretty good argument for why space has to be infinite, and I felt like it was treated dismissively. It's like,
the arrow argument, you mean?
Yeah, the arrow argument.
Yeah,
it's a pretty good argument.
Is it a good argument?
If you think of it in concert with the principle of sufficient reason, it's actually a pretty good argument.
Well, here's why it's not a good argument. Because why would you be able to think you could stand on the boundary? The boundary is the boundary. You can't stand on it and go past it. I mean, if it's the boundary, it's the boundary. Why? There's a bound. So the premise of the thought experiment, which says wherever there's a boundary, you can always go to it, stand on it, and do something past it, that's question begging. If there's a bound, then no, you can't. There's no point.
If the arrow stops moving, and the principle of sufficient reason is interpreted a certain way, then there would have to be something that prevented the arrow from continuing.
Yes.
And you might wonder where that thing is.
That thing is,
where is it?
Exactly where the edge of the universe is. I mean, in a way, this is, you know, if the universe is expanding, if you take this back to from Lucretius to modern cosmology, if inflationary cosmology is true, and at one point space-time itself expanded, then, you know, you're sort of asking us the version of a question which you often hear people say, which is, what is space expanding into? If space-time is expanding, then how? And yeah, of course it's hard for us to conceptually make sense of that. But if it's not expanding into further space, it's just space is expanding. So if there's a boundary, then you can't go to it and reach over. It's just a boundary.
Anyway, I didn't say Lucretius' argument was sound. I just thought it was a pretty good argument.
But you're right. But he was presented as Bruno would sneak away and read Lucretius on the nature of things, where he sets out his version of atomism, which, you know, is a pretty good version of atomism, except for he adds some stuff that Democritus wouldn't have approved of, like the atomic swerve, which is that atoms move in, you know, straight lines determined by their interactions with other atoms, except occasionally they randomly go like this. for no explanation. Yeah, and free will. So I mean, the idea that quantum indeterminacy or some indeterminacy at the fundamental level somehow helps us with free will goes back to Lucretius. Bad idea then, bad idea now. That's something else we should talk about.
Like that.
Why? I'm someone who believes very much in the phenomenology of free will and who questions very much whether that phenomenology should be taken at face value or not. Since I think that the only argument that you can really give for that there is libertarian free will is that you experience yourself as making free choices. That's what it seems like. I've literally had the experience of going, I'm about to break into this building. Should I do this? And I feel like at that moment I could have said no and walked away, but I didn't. I went in and I, you know, did what I did.
So you do believe that you have libertarian free will?
No, I believe that phenomenologically I experience myself as having this kind of free will. Whether that's accurate is the thing I wonder. Whether, you know, that's just phenomenology, whether that's just the way my determined choices are presented to me. You know, so this is, if we want to mention the work of Greg Caruso here, one of my friends and fellow Graduate Center compatriots, one of our old jamming buddies from way back in the day.
Yeah.
You know, he's written on this, and I think his view on this is nice. Maybe, you know, everything's determined except that you know, represent your experience as not being determined, and so you have the phenomenology of non-determinists with real determinism at the lower level. You know, I'm not against that. I wonder what kind of, you know, if you can give arguments against and so on. But my only claim was that phenomenologically, it's pretty clear that in experience, it seems like we're making choices. So at least some.
One thing we should talk about some other time is you know, is this free will stuff. It's interesting to me that you're a qualiophile but not a libertarian, and I see them as very parallel. That on there's this interface between sensory input and the rest of the mind, and that's where qualia lives. But there's also an interface between the mind and our bodily actions, and that's where free will lives. And one way of thinking about free will and qualia is that they're these like mystical, philosophical slices of baloney that philosophers insert into ontology, and they're both. I think they kind of stand and fall together, and it's interesting to see people that are skeptical about the one but not the other. People that are like yourself, qualia lovers, but probably not a libertarian about free will.
I probably might be a libertarian about free will, but I might also not be. I mean, free will is one of those issues where it's just like a mess to me. It seems like a mess, and I mean, like a real mess, like creatures of darkness level mess and stuff like that. But you're right. I am very much attracted to the libertarian position.
Oh, okay.
And to be honest, the way I got into philosophy as a historical note is by reading Descartes and Sartre. And if you want to talk about freedom, these are guys that seem to be interested in that. But what Sartre was doing was phenomenology, and so he was describing the way our own experience is as experienced by us, and we experience it. I think I think he was very good at doing this, picking out some characteristic features of what it's like to have experience. The phenomenology of free will is an important part of that. So and I do flirt with realism about that, but I don't know what that would mean in the same way that I do in the sense for consciousness. Because, for instance, the compatibilist move here doesn't satisfy me. So whereas I'm someone who's going to say about consciousness, look, consciousness is real, and maybe it turns out to be a higher order representation, and then that would be weird, but it doesn't show that it's false or that it's fake or that it doesn't exist. It's still, we just found out like what it is. And it has all the things that we thought about it. There's a lot of the common sense stuff that we thought is like still there. It's just now we know about it. That doesn't seem like you can. It doesn't seem to me. It's not clear. How do I put this? It's not obvious that you can do the same kind of move with compatibilism. That free will is real. We just found out that it's determined. I know compatibilists like this. Tried to make that same move, and so I don't want to be seen as trying to make a move like that in the consciousness realm. So I think you're right that there's an interesting parallel here. And then to bring the trifecta into trifecta-ness, we could talk about morality and moral properties, because I'm also a moral realist, and so those three things. Those three things, free will, moral realism, and consciousness realism, I think you're right. They have formed a traditional area where mysticism has hung out. And I sort of, to be honest with you, a part of my project is reclaiming those traditional notions for secular notions and materialist notions. I think it's a mistake to get rid of them. If we want to throw away consciousness, that's crazy talk. If we want to throw away morality, that's insane. What we need to do is fit them into the world, not toss them out of the world.
Wow.
So
I guess I'm your frenemy, because I want to toss all those things.
Yeah, exactly.
All three of them.
Yeah, that's bad. But see, of course, you don't really want to. I mean, I know people like you. You say stuff like that, but you don't mean it, because if you did, then you wouldn't be as worried about the gender issues in philosophy, or minorities getting jobs, and what we can do to help as people of privilege, as white male individuals in a field dominated by white male individuals. I personally know that you worry about that kind of stuff.
Who's the guy that tried to refute Berkeley by kicking the rock?
Johnson?
Yeah.
What about him?
He's like, I refute you thus, and he kicks the rock. And so that's what you're doing to me. You're saying like my moral idealism is refuted by the fact that I'm morally outraged by bad behavior.
Yes.
For example, the profession.
Exactly. That's my claim. Yeah, yeah. That the fact that if you really wanted to toss that stuff, you would cultivate a dispassionate attitude towards them. But clearly, there's got to be something of value that these kinds of attitudes and reactions have. That's the value of morality. That's why it's important to make sense of it somehow. Now, you want to make sense of it in terms of personal reactions or, societal pressures. Actually, I don't know what you want to make sense of in terms of. But it sounds like not in terms of like real things in making things, reacting worthy or something like, which is what I would want to say, that, it's appropriate to fear some things. It's not appropriate to fear other things. If you're afraid of a stuffed bunny, unless the stuffed bunny is made of poisonous, explosive things, it's inappropriate to be afraid of it. And maybe you can extend a case like that, the case like it's appropriate to be outraged by it. It's appropriate to be disquieted by it. No, I'm not saying you can do that. I'm just saying, what's wrong with looking at that and trying to make sense of our reactions in some kind of objective way, which is what we want to do in the other areas where we have these kinds of reactions. Now, you're going to say, no. Morality is like colors, and I already said I'm a color idealist. And so, I think that's an area to explore because a lot of people have grouped those things in the same category in the way you did. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
So, but come on, I got to go to work. I got a presentation.
Before you go, can you say your name and your affiliation?
Huh?
Can you say Richard Brown, professor of philosophy? Say that all together in one thing, so I can edit that into at some point.
Okay. How about this? Hello. I'm Richard Brown. Like that? No, I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, you didn't say it all together. You didn't say your name and your affiliation all in one, like.
Oh, I don't care about that.
Swoop.
Yeah.
Okay. Because we need an intro type thingy.
What I did was good.
Okay.
But by the way, I'm Richard Brown. How's that?
Okay.
I don't really care. Just put my name underneath me and type. I don't want to say
No, but it's going to be for the audio podcast thingy.
Yeah.
I will
put it there and type, and they'll hear it.
I'm going to insert it. I'm just going to do a Richard Brown impersonation. We might have enough material here for 2. We may have just done at least 2 episodes.
Okay. How about this? I'm Richard Brown, Associate Professor of Philosophy at CUNY LaGuardia, here for SpaceTimeMind.
That's gold. You're a star.
All right. Cool, though, but seriously, I have to get on the subway and go to work.
Okay, I'm going to mess around editing this, and I'll let you know how it goes.
Cool, man. Looking forward to the results. Later, dude.
Okay, bye-bye.
How do you end this? All right.